When I close my eyes, I can almost see it. When I take a breath, you fill up my lungs. And if my mind worked backwards just for a minute, I'd hold on to you before the memory's gone. I remember you, you lift my spirit. With you high is all I'm feeling. Remember how we felt alive. I remember you, you make me stronger. Can't go without it much longer. Remember, remember, I remember you, you lift my spirit. With you high is all I'm feeling. Remember how we...
Thai cultural archetypes, the positives and negatives. An archetype is a very typical or universal pattern for a character or situation. Why has Thai-ness endured? Before we look at the good and bad sides of Thai cultural behavior, I think we need to ask a more basic question. Why have these cultural patterns endured for so long? Why, in a country that has modernized so rapidly, do so many of the old ways of thinking and behaving remain remarkably strong? Thailand is only superficially modern. Bangkok, Pattaya and the islands are not really Thailand anymore. The Nana Plaza is really Bangkok. The population of Bangkok and other major cities and islands known to tourists is approximately 18 million in comparison to 54 million in the rest of Thailand, where ways of living have not changed for generation after generation. But there are several reasons why the sometimes oblique set of thinking and behaviors have endured. The first is isolation. Thailand has never been completely isolated. It has always traded with the outside world and has absorbed influences from China, India, Europe, and more recently, America. But it was never colonized by a European power. On one hand, colonization by a Western power may well have produced better democratic principles and a stronger, more equitable economy and more exports, but it may not have done so. Colonization would not automatically have produced democracy. Britain, France, the Netherlands, and other colonial powers were generally not democracies in the colonies. Colonial governments were usually authoritarian, racially hierarchical, and designed to serve the interests of the imperial power. However, there is a more interesting possibility. If Thailand had eventually moved from colonial rule to independence, perhaps after the Second World War, it might have inherited institutions such as a more clearly defined civil service, stronger courts and legal institutions, a more formal separation between government institutions, a developed parliamentary tradition, clearer administrative procedures, stronger concepts of individual legal rights, a more established relationship between taxation and government services. That doesn't guarantee democracy, but it could have provided better foundations for one. In reality, Thailand was able to modernize on its own terms and preserve much more of its existing social structure for good or for worse. English language knowledge and Western ideas have never penetrated Thai society as deeply as they have in countries that were part of the British or American world. The EF English Proficiency Index comparison. Singapore, Malaysia and Myanmar were colonized by the British. Laos, Cambodia and Vietnam by the French. Indonesia by the Dutch, and the Philippines by the Spanish and USA. The global ranking of English proficiency gives a world rank, score and ability. For example, 1 is the highest. Malaysia has a global ranking of 28. That's high. The Philippines also 28. Vietnam 64. Indonesia 80. That's low. Myanmar also low at 99. Laos 88. Thailand, a superficially more sophisticated nation, is near the bottom of the global list at 116, with only Cambodia, just a little behind, ranked at 123. Only 4 other countries are lower. This is one reason why a Thai who has spent several years being educated in Britain or America can sometimes seem remarkably different from someone educated entirely in Thailand. The outside influence is not just about language. It changes the way people think. The second is family. The Thai family has traditionally been the most important social safety net, but we have to be careful about romanticizing this. For many poorer families, several generations living together isn't simply because they love the idea of a big extended family. It's because they need each other in a country where the gap between the wealthy and the poor is so starkly delineated both in terms of income as well as social mobility. Grandparents provide childcare, children support parents, money is shared, housing is shared. People look after elderly relatives because there may be nobody else to do it. So poverty has helped preserve the extended family, and the family then becomes the first place where Thai cultural behavior is taught. Children learn who they must respect, how they should behave towards older people, what they should believe, and what they should not question. The third reason is poverty and inequality. Thailand has become considerably wealthier, but that wealth is very unevenly distributed. A wealthy Bangkok family can live a completely modern, Western-style life. But that isn't the experience of everybody. Where people have fewer economic choices, they remain more dependent upon family, community, employers, and people with influence. And that makes traditional relationships extremely important. If you don't have money, education, or institutional power, knowing the right person can matter enormously. So poverty doesn't just preserve old lifestyles. It can preserve old relationships and behaviors and beliefs. Then there is education. This is not simply a question of whether Thai students challenge their teachers. Challenging a teacher isn't automatically a virtue, and Western education has plenty of its own problems. The problem I see is something different. A great deal of Thai education is based on a relatively narrow, Thai-centric body of knowledge, taught in a fairly dogmatic way, with enormous importance placed on getting the grade rather than acquiring the knowledge. The student learns what needs to be learned to pass the examination. The grade becomes the achievement. But a high grade doesn't necessarily mean a broad education. A student can move through school and university successfully without having been exposed to much of the history, literature, politics, and ideas that someone educated in the West might take for granted. Most Thai students have no idea about the world wars or the Holocaust, and that matters because education is one of the main ways a society changes. If the education system keeps reproducing the same limited assumptions, then those assumptions are passed from one generation to the next. It doesn't have to be deliberate. The system simply keeps producing people who have been taught the same things in the same way. And this is why the difference between someone educated entirely in Thailand and someone who has spent several years being educated in Britain, America, or elsewhere can be so striking. The difference isn't necessarily intelligence, it's exposure. One person has spent their education largely inside the same cultural framework. The other has been exposed to a completely different one, which brings us to religion, which is another reason these cultural themes have endured. In Thailand, Buddhism has never been completely separated from everyday life, family life, or the state in the way religion has become separated from public life in Britain. But Thai Buddhism is also more than Buddhism in the strict sense. It exists alongside older beliefs in spirits, ghosts, luck, karma, astrology, and supernatural forces. These ideas are reinforced from childhood by parents, grandparents, schools, temples, and ceremonies. So they are not simply private beliefs. They become part of the way people understand the world. Religion therefore acts as a very effective carrier of tradition. It gives authority to ideas about respect, hierarchy, duty, family and behavior, while older beliefs are continually renewed through everyday practice. The result is that cultural ideas which might otherwise have disappeared with modernization are repeatedly passed from one generation to the next. Then there is the law. Thailand has laws. It has courts, police, and government departments, but the existence of a law doesn't necessarily mean that everybody experiences the law in the same way. At the simplest level, most people who have lived in Thailand know that sometimes a few hundred baht given to a cop can make a traffic problem disappear. Sometimes there is no infringement at all, just a shakedown. That's corruption at the bottom of the system. But the same principle can operate at a much higher level. Money, connections, and influence can determine what happens when much more serious crimes are involved. And this is where things become particularly disturbing. A murder should be about one thing. What happened? Who did it? What is the evidence? What does the law say? But if a powerful family, a local business interest, or a mafia network has something to lose, the truth can become inconvenient. The investigation can then become less about discovering what actually happened, and more about protecting somebody, protecting an institution, or protecting money. That doesn't mean every murder investigation is corrupt. It doesn't mean every policeman is corrupt. But if people believe that the law can be bought at the bottom and influenced at the top, then the credibility of the entire system is damaged. And once people stop believing that the law will protect them equally, they fall back on the things they trust instead: family, connections, money, and people who have power. And that brings us straight back to the age-old system of corruption. Corruption isn't just somebody taking a bribe. It is a system in which the formal rules can be different from the rules that actually operate. The official rule might say one thing, but the practical rule might be: who do you know? How much can you pay? Who can you call? How important is the person on the other side? And this is why corruption is so difficult to remove. It creates its own support system. The policeman takes a few hundred baht. The businessman pays somebody to solve a problem. The wealthy family uses its connections. The politician protects his supporters. The institution protects itself. And everybody who benefits from the system has a reason not to change it. Let's talk about something that foreigners in Thailand often complain about: corruption on the roads, and something that benefits foreigners and the poorest of Thais: prostitution. In Britain, if you're caught riding a motorcycle without a helmet, you can receive a fine of up to £500. For speeding, there is a fixed penalty of £100 and 3 penalty points, and depending on how serious the offense is, the fine can become considerably higher. If you drink and drive, you can lose your license, receive a substantial fine, and, in serious cases, go to prison. The system is pretty straightforward. You break the law, you get caught, and there is a prescribed penalty. Thailand is different. If you're stopped for a relatively minor traffic offense, the official fine might be 400 baht. But when you're standing at the side of the road with a policeman, something else can happen. A negotiation begins. You might be told that the offense could mean a much larger fine, or that you could be taken to the police station. Then quite often, a few hundred baht changes hands and suddenly the problem has disappeared. And if you're a foreigner, the amount can depend on how much the policeman thinks you are willing or able to pay. The same thing can happen with drink driving. In Britain, drink driving is treated very seriously. In Thailand, you can find yourself sitting at a police box, being told that you could go to jail and that the consequences could be severe. Then suddenly, somehow, a negotiation becomes possible. And this is where we have to be honest. It is very easy for a foreigner to complain about corruption in Thailand while happily participating in it. If a policeman lets you ride away for 500 baht instead of giving you a formal ticket, you have benefited from corruption. You may not like the system. You may think the policeman is corrupt. But you have just helped keep the system going. And that's the important point about corruption. It isn't simply something that happens at the top of government or inside big businesses. It can become part of everyday life. The policeman takes the money. The motorcyclist pays it. The problem disappears. Everybody goes home. And because both sides have benefited, there is very little incentive for either side to change the system. So corruption doesn't simply undermine the law. It helps preserve the entire social structure around it. And that is the important point. These things don't exist separately. Isolation helps preserve the culture. Family teaches the relationships and behaviors. Poverty makes those relationships necessary. Education enforces the same ideas. Unevenly applied law and corruption makes personal connections, religion and superstitions more reliable. You might reasonably ask, how does any of this support the cultural archetypes that we have heard about and which we will be talking about later? Greng Jai, face, Boon Kun, Gam, and all the rest. Well, it doesn't support every one of them directly, but it can reinforce the environment in which they survive. Greng Jai is about not causing difficulty or embarrassment to other people. An arrangement that everybody understands but nobody openly discusses is a perfect example of that principle in practice. Not telling parents the truth about her way of earning money, even though they probably already know. Face is maintained because the reality can remain unspoken. The family may know where the money comes from, but there is often no need to publicly acknowledge it. Boon Kun, the idea of merit and good deeds creating moral benefit, can be seen in the continuing importance of giving money to parents and family, even when the money itself comes from an occupation that society officially disapproves of. And Gam, the idea of karma and consequences, provides another framework through which people can understand hardship, duty, reward, and misfortune. The prostitution that does not exist. Prostitution aids in creating these beliefs. The informal economy can operate inside the same cultural framework. People continue to protect face. They continue to avoid embarrassing confrontation. They continue to support their parents. They continue to maintain relationships rather than destroy them. They continue to live with contradictions between what is officially permitted and what actually happens. So even something as apparently modern and disruptive as the sex industry can end up reproducing some very old social relationships. And that is the wider point I'm making about Thai-ness. Culture doesn't survive because everybody consciously decides to preserve it. It survives because everyday life almost forces the system to reproduce itself. And that, I think, are the reasons why Thai cultural archetypes have proved so remarkably resistant to change.